And just to say that we're really delighted to have Rebecca Hilton and Jodie Melnick and John Jaspers, Susan Sentler, Glenna Batson, Ryan O'Neill and Stephanie Dufresne joining us here for the Q&A. I just want to encourage people that you are welcome to raise a hand, and we will promote you to panelist if you have a question, and then you can just ask the question. You'll be here with us. If you really don't want to be seen for some reason, you can just put the question into chat, and we'll have a look. We'll try and get to them as best we can. It's been a busy morning with a lot of information, so we really want this to be a moment where, as attendees, that you can really just talk and, you know, have a chance to speak. So please feel free to get those questions flowing. We'll keep an eye open for the raise hand. So you go to the bottom of your screen and you press the raise hand function, okay? And then we'll see you and bring you up.
Okay, and I just thought we could start a little conversation going. It's been a huge kind of amount of, a huge morning. Oh my God. But amazingly rich as well. And we hope, you know, that there's opportunity for people to come back and look at things at a later time as well. I mean, one of the things, I'm just trying to start an idea. I don't know if it's possible to summarize anything, but definitely what's come through a lot is this idea of I suppose the humanity of the experience of dancing, which often, you know, when we talk about getting, you know, older, the idea is you kind of, when you're young as a dancer, you represent this particular kind of object that can be glorified in a particular way and there isn't really a lot of space given to the actual human experience of that, but also the kind of things that Becky, Jodie and John were talking about, the kind of knowledges that are intrinsic to that, the kind of relationships, the kind of interconnections and relationship to self and environment and space. And of course, we're not going to glorify this, but at the same time, there are really kind of quite significant knowledges in that space and about being in the world, really. And I just was wondering if anybody, I mean, panelists, feel free to unmute yourselves. If anybody wants to kind of talk a little bit about that or respond to that idea.
I do.
Oh, great, Glenna.
We won't wait in you know, tense silence. I have thought about this a long time. I mean, I'm going to be 72 this year, and I still dance in certain forms. And of course, I do somatics, which helps me greatly. But I had a real hard time trying to define who I was. You know, am I a veteran dancer, a mature dancer, an elder dancer, a seasoned dancer? You know, what kind of word is going to define the sort of thing I do, which then doesn't minimize the fact that I am human and I am still moving in a way that's intentional. And I finally came up with, well, I need a verb. So I said, I'm dancing while aging. And that was sort of the phrase that I could come up with, which really made sense for me. And I'm just wondering how other people feel about that kind of thing. Thank you.
Does anybody want to throw in with
Say
that?
something. I'm doing human hand instead of emoji hand.
That you must use the function. No.
You know, I have this, I've realized this about myself in this, dealing so much in the virtual world. I have this like external obedience, internal resistance thing going on, and my external obedience is being consumed by my internal resistance in these contexts. So I have the Zoom rage. But Glenna, I don't know that I ever really explicitly asked myself that question. But I always call myself a dance person. And then people can just ask the follow-up question if they want to. And that seems like a kind of constructive way to move on from identifying purely as a dancer and all of the connotations that may or may not have for whoever you're talking to, but a way to still keep dance kind of central in the conversation somehow.
Yeah, I like that. I had heard a man say that he was a man who dances, you know, sort of somewhat similarly in that vein. It's just people often ask me what I do. And so they're already into the what I do. kind of thing. And, you know, of course I can describe other ways but I don't want to, because I'm not like a dance artist, I have to, but still dance is so critical in terms of the way I think, in the way I put words together, in the way, you know, it supersedes even somatic work in terms of how I live in the world. And so it becomes, that sort of, I love this idea of the external obedience and the inner resistance, which of course at this point in time is reaching an all-time high. But I often, I suppose what the work I need to do might be to just say, who cares what they think? I mean, that's, you know, ultimately what I can say. And to just, you know, I might decide to just adopt a moniker that's totally different altogether, like, you know, I clean house, and see what they say. I mean, it could be, or I clean house intentionally. It might be another way of putting it out there. Thank you.
And yeah, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, no, just to follow up on that. Number one, I just love the conversation the three of you had I mean, it's just wild. And so many things just arose in myself because things change, you know, and you shift. And there was a moment in my life where I kind of wanted to just like let go of the dancer. But then I realized the older I got, the more the dancer started coming out in various ways, just the way I see. I photograph a lot. I do other kind of art stuff. So maybe, John, I'm aligning with you on this. But it's now evolving into this palette of kind of knowledge and consciousness that it doesn't stop. It keeps growing. But it's growing you mentioned a matrix, it's growing in this other kind of realm, an association too, that kind of blows me away. I'm glad you mentioned the biased, because yeah, I think we do fall into that category of knowing. I remember teaching this group, independent, an interdisciplinary project that had everything but dancers in it. And the designers all of a sudden had this fantastic phenomenological experience with their body in the space that they had never really touched upon before. And I was like, yahoo, you know, we won. But yeah, age is really interesting. There's it's that kind of letting go, but the letting go allows you to acquire so much more. It's kind of like vulnerability makes you empowered. You know, you have to go that full vulnerability in order to be empowered.
Jody.
Hi, guys. I won't start with age yet, but I'll start with Becky. I'll start with, I think I've always identified as not a dancer, but a kind of like a movement junkie in a way, ever since I could remember. And I think that, you know, as John had said in our last talk, I don't know, I don't remember, I think you talk about it on how you put it together, is that you viewed me, I was viewed as a very dancerly dancer, and I know we viewed Becky in the community that way, with, you know, all this technical and vibrato and expression that came from your body with Stephen. And I don't think that we saw each other as or saw ourselves as dancers as much as we saw ourselves, or I saw myself as just somebody who is constantly moving, even when I was in a very company and was training more technically. So it hasn't, for me, I don't feel different today in that sense. My body certainly feels different, but my head around my identity doesn't feel different, as it doesn't feel different when I go to the market. You know, I was in the market yesterday getting stuff, and it's a whole new world, and we're thinking about other things, but I don't feel like I'm a different heart person, like a different movement. It's still embodied in me. I don't change, like, and I don't know if that's good or bad, but there are no real separations. I feel like it's the same as getting up and making tea or coffee and brushing my teeth and then going to the studio and training and putting on, performing and going out for a drink. Yeah. So that constant idea of being a mover is how I feel about myself, not the dancer.
And I'm just interested, maybe Ryan and Stephanie might, you might have something to say in relation to this current time when we're really kind of not able to. I mean, I think you both probably have a lot of work as dancers that you had lined up that kind of, has kind of, I suppose, disappeared in ways or been postponed, and what that feels like,
Yeah, I'm actually, it's really fascinating to hear people, the panelists talking about aging in dance, because I feel we're all in the process of, I'm turning 30 during this pandemic, in this year when, I had contracts lined up, basically freelancers are saying, okay, that's 2020 gone. And I am more, I think because of that, more aware than ever of my humanity when it comes to dance and my life, I guess. And I think my video responses were, I guess, in a response to that, the fact that there's no studios. I'm in this landscape where I'm from, which in and of itself is very humbling. And I'm, alone, isolated, alone in the west of Ireland with my boyfriend and family, but like totally adrift from any kind of, the career I had or structures. So it's actually really inspiring to hear everyone else talking about that. And I think in a way there's a lot in that, this, what I think Susan was saying about the letting go, that I've had to let go of, when you're a freelancer, you're kind of constantly trying to stay in this rhythm and, very concerned about output and virtuosity. And I think what the pandemic has done, which is amazing, is just like fell all of that and go, okay, you're a human being in this place with your family, and what do you want to make and what do you want to do?
Yeah. Did you want to say something, Ryan? And we've got one question coming in then. So,
so I mean, I guess since I don't have as much experience as the rest of this panel, so it's really amazing to hear how this has affected you as well. But just kind of, it's about what's important once everything's stripped away. Like, I guess a lot of my work and our work would be transmissions from different people, and once that's gone and that's your profession, what do you do? I really related to what Rebecca was saying in her chat this morning about the confusion, and I felt that really strongly. And I live in the house with another dancer and artist as well, and just kind of the proactivity that dancers have to go out and do something and make something out of nothing is also something that was kind of feels and works and is just another kind of process of things, and it kind of never stops. It's a constant cycle of like trying and repeating, and I guess this space now has made me realize how like interconnected I am with so many companies and choreographers and people, and what I stand for as an individual and what my contribution is to the whole thing is something I need to kind of figure out and play with. And I find it quite exciting. It's the time to kind of take risks and do things, because nobody really knows what they're doing, especially on a digital platform, and I haven't got a clue. But yeah, there's something playful now towards the end of it where I think there's something quite positive that could come out of the experience of lockdown.
Great. John, did you want to respond? We've got one question as well. Are you? After that. Oh, Sheila. Great. Someone's brought you in. All right. So, sorry.
I'm just unmuting her now.
Okay. I think we're both doing the same thing. Yeah. So you unmute. Okay. Great.
Hi everybody.
Hi, Sheila.
Am I okay to ask now, or?
Yeah, go for it. Yes.
Great. Thank you. I really, really appreciated the shared experience and being on the fly on the wall for such an interesting conversation. Thank you for that. Rebecca, you mentioned in this conversation you were reflecting on meetings and using bodies in space to indicate care or protection. You were responding in a change dynamic to a change dynamic in the room, and I found that a really sort of interesting and relevant observation. Felt it was sort of articulated that we're noticing more about ourselves and spatial dynamics by being separated as we are right now, and learning more about ourselves and how we or have that chance to observe each other. And learning how that in having to adapt to different ways of communicating. I wondered if any of the panelists had any thoughts on that particular sort of situation to share with makers and performers who have concerns about entering the studio again post-COVID.
John, would you like to, I don't know, I don't want to, but you were talking about, you're currently trying to do some work, aren't you, in the, yeah, John? I just muted you.
Yeah, I have been continuing. I was making a piece and we decided to continue trying to rehearse on Zoom, which of course is completely bizarre, but also one of the things that I think has been very strange about it is that it has really forced a kind of relationship to what's actually happening into the center of the project. Like there's no way around it. And I don't know, for me, there's this kind of question of the translation back into another space, but it also kind of questions, well, if the project is developing around this, why would it ever leave this space? Like, why would we go back into a theater? So, or you know, and these kinds of questions are arising for me also in thinking about, as a director of a dance program, about like, what's the transition back to having students together in the studio? I wish I had something great to say about that. I don't really know. I think about it all day long, about how to do that safely, but also what that means in terms of what we're actually engaged in. And I'm kind of in the middle of the muddle of it, rather than with any kind of like precise thing to say about what that will look like, or what the appropriate way.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, maybe, because sorry, I thought are you finished?
Yeah, I mean,
I think there is. I think what Ryan is talking about, this kind of tendency to get the show on no matter what. We were experiencing this with the Symposium as well, you know. And so, Susan, yeah.
I was just, I was reflecting what Becky said earlier about the words are becoming more poignant almost. And I think loads of people in other practices are talking about writing at this time. Again, kind of shifting modalities and allowing that space and time when re-entering, because if we're dealing with social distancing, if we go back in, you know, because I mean, I'm in a situation here, not teaching again, but Singapore is going into this framework of 30% online, and then what happens in the studio? Are you going to do social distancing? Who's going to touch or not? You know, are they all going to be wearing masks? It's crazy, and you know, and in a way, I feel like the ones who have had experience, I think we shift modalities to an extent, because I think it can still inform the body and can inform the practice. The thing I'm scared of are the newbies entering in who haven't had this experience. And it's like, you know, there's no way you can teach them on this. There's no way you can reiterate on this. You can have a conversation, you can be stimulated, you can, you know, but to begin, that for me is the frightening point.
Students that we were working with who were in a more like what we call movement fundamentals, really fresh to dance. It just becomes, then they're just like in this pure relationship of screen flatness.
And then they're just mimicking, surfacing.
Yeah.
It's all surface.
You know, there's this no distance thing, and they have nothing to cull in terms of their own kind of. So, but that actually is not entirely true, because I really felt like the more we could get them out of this and get them back into their own physiological experiences of memory that are not dance related, the better that was working.
And even when you're working with this, with Zoom or whatever, you know, to not frame this, to allow getting away, coming back, you know, so having these break periods of different type of ways of tasting, of experiencing is crucial.
And it was very interesting in my rehearsal process. We had, the day before we finished, we had this moment of where we started working on this thing that felt very magical. It was a kind of delicacy inside of it, and we were just beginning, and then it got cut off. And we kept trying to go back to this. And at some point I realized, like, every time that we went back to it through this means, we were getting farther and farther away. And at one point I was like, part of this is just this, it was about touch, and we can't touch. So like, we got into this moment where I was just like, let's just try this moment of like, we're going to turn the screen off, and we created a kind of score of how we were going to deal with attention, and then it just became a language thing. There's an echo.
Jody, did you want to say? I think
I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Susan was saying. Is that the thing I'm more fearful of is the opposite. Is having to, or having the desire to sort of grow another brain to deal with this in a non-physical way. And that I do think it is possible. And there is a huge amount. I've been doing a lot of Zoom rehearsing and practicing on a daily basis, pretty much every day, some kind of physical practice and figuring out. And it's something that I'm used to. Like I said, being a mover my whole life, have always found some kind of some kind of space. And I think translating that even to newbies is something that just takes practice. And with practice, there's failure and frustration. And I know, I was listening to Becky's I Miss Outside, and how eloquent and succinct, and how you choose your words. And yes, you took time to choose your words, which is an act of practice. And how singular your voice was, but also how kind of expansive it was at the same time. And it was very nuanced, and it reminded me of how I feel when I see you dance, when I've seen you dance, my memories of you dance. And I feel like people have the head for that, or the interest in that. And there's got to be a way that practitioners maintain their commitment and the way of transmitting detail. And I'm learning a lot by teaching people that I've never taught before. When we went remote with Sarah Lawrence, where John runs the program, I'd known my students for, I don't know, how long were we in session, John? A month before we went remote. So how long?
8 weeks.
Yeah, so I knew them for a huge chunk of time before. So it's a different experience knowing a group of people, or knowing people I've had rehearsals with, to transition into remote than it is to teach newbies or people new to your philosophies about the body and stuff. So that's all I want to say.
Did you want to say something? Yeah, you don't have to. You can actually just unmute yourself. I'll unmute you. Oh, you don't.
There we go. In relation to all of those things a little bit, I feel a bit like I'm a drone. Like I'm zoomed out of the usual conditions, and I can see it. And I was telling this to a good friend of ours, Terry O'Connor. I had a Skype with him Zoom earlier this weekend. He said he wants to invent these drones that come to your house and like slap you or kiss you, or just like it's an amazing way to reacquaint ourselves with touch, is have drones flown by Terry O'Connor in to kind of touch us. I thought that was beautiful. But there is something, the opportunity for the zoom out, for want of a better word, does give this opportunity that as we do re-enter, we can re-see these things that we, I think, take for granted as dance people, that we often like a bunch of puppies in a room all over one another. There's this like instant intimacy thing. There's, to me it feels like a kind of opportunity to be like, oh, what is it? What do we do? How do we do it? Like there's a real opportunity to not rush right back to the old conditions, because we can't, but to really take the time to understand and articulate, you know, what is it? What are these things we all talk about or don't or do, you know? And then, of course, it's dangerous because some things dance is really a field of tacit knowledge, right? And that's why it's so important to learn it from bodies without words necessarily. So that will always be there. But I think here's the opportunity to talk to the point or kind of articulate to the point where we just can't anymore, you know, up
There's
to the point.
Also, Becky, there's something with patience in that, like, and with age and patience, that's not a great pairing.
You mean because it's too slow?
Yeah. And you always feel as a dancer, I mean, even what Stephanie was saying, who's considerably younger than us, there's a sense of it's got to happen now because I'm a dancer. Things are, you know, quick, you know, it's going to happen. If I don't do it now, it's going to leave, and it won't, Stephanie. It's there for a long time. But there, you can't help that feeling. I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry, Jen.
No, not at all. That's perfect. I think we're going to have to end there. And even though we'd love to keep talking, I think everyone needs a break. And just to say, it's been really amazing to have everybody with us as attendees as well. And thanks so much for all of you for coming in for this session. We're going to close the webinar. We'll open it again just a little bit before.
Can I just say, yeah, that time we're going to reopen the webinar at about 2:20.
Yeah.
To be ready then if you want to come back on to see Luke Murphy's movement response, which is called Beach. We'll begin with that this afternoon.
I'd have to, yeah. And we understand if you go away and come back, because this is quite intense, but you know, you'll be able to catch everything again on the events page if you want to look at it another time. Yeah. And the saddest thing is that we're not all going to go now and have a coffee together and a hug or whatever. But anyway, sending lots of love and thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, bye.